And to make a long story short, he said, we Jews don't have a past. So Abraham is not deceased. He's with us now.
Right.
The temple is with us now. There's no such thing
Mourning.
as it's in the past.
Right, no such thing as in the past. Rosh Hashiva used to say, a lot of people say this, but I remember him saying this repeatedly around this time of year, that Napoleon walked by a building once and it was a commotion, so it was a shul. And the commotion was, they told him it was the Jews, they were crying for the temple. He's like, when did that happen? He said, about 2,000 years ago. He said, what? He said, that's eternal. Someone said, how many Turks are still mourning the defeat of the fall of Constantinople? No, how many? Or something like that. Nobody's.
Modern Turkey.
Right. It's there was a famous maybe in the Bayless trial, a famous thing because it says it was in Chukas we had it when we talked about the red heifer, the Para Aduma.
What did you translate it to me by?
You never know, right? Yeah, translate it to Hebrew, right? Yeah. I know. Sometimes the English needs to translate back into the Hebrew. It's better that way. Nobody knows what a heifer is. Nobody ever uses that word except for.
It's a young female.
Yeah, right. But nobody uses the word. It's like, unless you're a farmer.
Low-life slang people use it to refer to a young girl.
Right. Okay. Right. There you go. So they're sophisticated use of language, but we're perhaps not all privy to. So basically, I think it's Zos HaTorah Adam Ki Amos Ba'ohel, right? It says, here's the rule: when a person dies in a tent, the rule is that being under a roof with a dead body, a person becomes tameh, becomes impure. A person or an object or food can become impure. Right? We call it tumas ohel, which is why a kohen can't attend the funeral if they stay outside. It can't be under the same roof as a dead body. So the rabbis say that this only applies to Jewish people, not to non-Jewish people. And I believe there's actually an Adam, a person, and it says, I think there's a verse somewhere in Nach, something, Adam Atem, you are an Adam, and it means you, not a non-Jew. So the famous, that's not something which non-Jews like to hear. So I think it might have been in the context of the Bayless trial, or maybe it wasn't, but it's a famous thing that, the non-Jew confronts a Jewish authority. How can you say such a thing in your Talmud? That means that you think we're not human, we're subhuman. So he said, let me explain it to you. I think there may have been more to it, but the punchline was, he said, if a Russian person had a problem somewhere in a different country, how many Russians would make that a personal concern of theirs? But here you see, here's a Jew who has an issue, and Jews all over the world are concerned. He says, that's what it means, Adam Hashem. You, as a Jewish nation, are one person. That's not true about any other nation. It's not that you're the only people who are human beings. He always said the word Adam is unique because we have the word like Ish, a man, or Isha, a woman, or Yeled, Yelda. Those all have singular and plural forms, female and male forms. Ish Anashim, Isha Nashim, right? Yeled, Yeled. Everything can be in the plural, but Adam, there's no plural of Adam, there's no male, female. It's just Adam, a human. It's one human. So he said that that's a unique aspect of the Jewish people. We're one person. So they say it's not only true in terms of individuals that every Jew feels connected to every other Jew, it's also true over time. That in time we're all connected. That's what Rabbi Miller was saying. That's why it says, my Rabbi used to say when we read the Haggadah, the basic text that we say at the Seder, when we tell the story, and there's a lot of different pieces to it, but the basic story comes from the Torah, but not in the part of the Torah which actually talks about the story of Egypt, but it's in a part of the Torah that we're going to read in a few weeks from now. In Ki Tavo, it is a mitzvah called Bikurim, bringing the first fruits. The mitzvah is to bring the first fruits to the Har HaBayis, to bring them to the Kohen. And the Torah tells you what you should say when you bring the fruits to the Kohen. And you're supposed to say, Arabi, 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 on your Mitzrayim, but exactly the words in the Haggadah. There was a person from Aram, who wanted to destroy my father, and he went down to Egypt, and the Egyptians were bad to us. Now we comment on that. Haggadah elaborates, and has a lot of other detail, but the basic story comes from there. So it says, the Gemara says the following: someone is in trouble, and he has to let other people know about it. Like a person is sick, there's a lot of people they want to hide it. Other people want to tell everybody about it, But the right way, the Torah way, is people should know. Why? Because if people know, then they can pray for you. And that's a Jewish idea. We say there is a practical purpose in letting people know that there's a problem, because that way they can pray. And it brings source for that from this story, because it says that a person brings the first fruits. He says the anisa va'amarta. You should anisa, we think like to answer, right? But la'anot in Hebrew means to answer, but also means to declare. Well, like do not declare false testimony. To say something loudly and very emphatically is also, I guess, the question is that you ask something, and when you answer, you're like, you tell them an answer. So you're supposed to say this declaration loudly and emphatically. So why? It says because that way you declare and you recount the suffering of the Jewish people, and then people around you can pray. The commentary on the Talmud Basha says, pray for what? We got out of Egypt a while ago. He says maybe he suggests that we can pray for the future, because things happen, they happen, especially in Jewish history. Things are always happening again, and everything that happens 1,000 times. He said maybe pray for the future. So my Rebbe said, imagine that. Here you have a farmer. What's he doing? He lives in Israel, and he has a farm. He has completed the season, and it's been a successful season, and he has first fruit. The whole purpose of the mitzvah is gratitude. And the Mishnah describes how festive it was, what a great celebration. It was joyful. They had musical instruments, they had a whole parade, they came up together from different cities, they met, they came to Yerushalayim, everyone stood up to greet them. And they had ox with gold-plated horns, and they had beautiful baskets, and they had extra fruits to make it more beautiful, and they had, they're all going, everyone's marching up, and then what do they do? In order to fully express and appreciate the gratitude, they tell the whole story. We came out like we did the Seder, but with great joy, and that basically that whole idea. And look where we came from, and look where that's what we do at the Seder, right? You start from the lowest point. We almost got destroyed. Look where we are today. Look where we are today. And for 700 years, my family has been living in the same spot. We came into the land miraculously. We conquered the land, and I got this little piece. And my father was working, my grandfather was, my great grandfather was working, and now we had another successful year. Hashem's bounty and a prosperous year, right? And then somebody's standing there listening to you. And who's listening to you? Another Jew who also knows the story just as well as you do. And he hears about someone said, once a rabbi said, how come women don't learn Gemara? He says, because, a husband comes to paper on the table. What are you studying today? She picks it up, reads the Mishnah. Person, a woman's husband went out to a foreign country and never came back. What happened? The men don't it's like, oh, it's a case, whatever, it happened. The point is, he wants to know if this and if that, that's what women don't learn about. But someone's going to hear this whole story about Egypt and the first, like, oh my goodness, and they start davening to Hashem. Oh, Hashem, please do so. So Rosh Hashanah said the point is really that it doesn't make sense, but it does make sense because we really are one unit. And if you went to Yad Vashem, right, or a celebration, Yom HaAtzmaut or whatever, and someone got up and talked about, we had the Holocaust. Now, if someone who had actually lived through the Holocaust, it wouldn't matter if it was 75 years ago, and that they would still feel all those emotions over it. So it's not strange to think that if you come to the temple with your Bikurim and everyone's celebrating and joyful, and another Jew is listening, and they hear the story, and they suddenly are shaken up and they start to daven. That's not strange at all, because it is us. It doesn't matter if it was last year or 700 years ago or 3,000 years ago. We do relate to it as one person, and that's why things like this could happen. That's why the Torah says, yeah, absolutely, people should know. We have to know what we've been through, because we are, we're only disconnected, and it's like It's like what's where sometimes we get unplugged from that from the grid, but basically underneath we're all one unit, and sometimes it's not so much conscious. That's one of the I guess kind of the um, approaches to the whole idea with the Tishah B'av that it says. And we talk about in the morning, calm, Yerushalayim, whoever mourns for Jerusalem gets to see the joy. I think Rabbi Dessler says this. He says it doesn't say that a person who mourns for Jerusalem will get a reward, that they will have the privilege of experiencing joy. First of all, I mean, I guess that's true, but everybody will, unless they're wicked, anybody will experience the joy at some point. But there certainly have been people who mourned for Jerusalem and then died, and maybe they'll come back. Well, we know when they did come back to life, but he says that's not the only meaning here. It's in the present tense.
Yeah.
Yeah? Hello?
Sorry, can I ask you a question about something you said?
Yes.
Sure. You said they can do something unless they're wicked. Now, so some people are just wicked and they follow different guidelines than other people.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. So we give people the benefit of the doubt. Generally speaking, we leave the decision of wickedness up to God. In most cases, we can look at people and we can say that they're well-intentioned, but perhaps misguided or falling short. So we don't spend too much time worrying about. There are certain things that are really wicked, but most of the people around us, I think, thankfully, are not wicked. At least we can assume that they're not. In any case, so Rabbi Dessler says it's in the present tense. Whoever mourns for Yerushalayim, so he says the person experiences right then, because the reason a person does not mourn for Jerusalem is that they're disconnected from that spiritual core, and they're not in touch with it. And that's really that's really a unfortunate state to be in. Somebody who does mourn for Jerusalem is reconnecting, and plugging back into that subconscious, that spiritual identity that we have. That is a rebuilding. That person is experiencing an inner redemption. So there's great joy in that, because it's like a person who, if a person I can't think of the right metaphor exactly. But, we can all relate to this. There are times in our lives when we're kind of occupied with mundane things, maybe everyday things that are not really that important, but maybe we're paying our bills, or we're taking out the garbage, or doing ordinary washing the dishes, and it doesn't take a lot of brain work. It doesn't take a lot of emotional involvement, and it's just get through the day. Then there are times that are very emotionally intense, and often those times are both good and bad at the same time. There's a lot of emotion, whether it's family things or spiritual things that really are powerful. It's usually not absolute joy. It's usually a mixture of different things that are wonderful, things that have room for improvement. And those times we're much more emotionally engaged. We're much more alive. So the idea is, and when we experience the pain of Jerusalem, we're also experiencing the joy of Jerusalem, because then we're connected. Otherwise, we forget who we are, and we just think we're just ordinary people, lives, doing things without great significance. And it may be less uncomfortable, but it's certainly not a joyful way to live. Whereas when we can sit on the floor and really feel the weight of Jewish history, that's a tremendously uplifting thing, because we realize what an incredible thing we're part of. Like they say, the people made this point even in modern times. I think it was where I read it. You read these kinds of things like this all the time. Unfortunately, that people say that, you have people in other countries, people in America who wants to join the army in America. They have everything that American kids grow up with, everything they want, and everyone's complaining about what a terrible country this is. Then you have people in Israel, they're putting their lives on the line every day, and the country is in trauma and crisis, and yet they go out joyfully. They have a sense of mission. They're not joyful like ha ha, They're not, there's tremendous pain, but they're so idealistic. They feel. I don't necessarily mean just the soldiers. It doesn't matter what they're doing. Maybe they're praying at the kotel for the soldiers to succeed. Maybe they're learning. But anyone who's contributing to the nation, whether physically or spiritually, in any capacity, I heard Rabbi Edelman, I think, said that at some point when after October 7th, the morale is so high in the country. Doesn't mean not morale is so high because everything's wonderful, but on the contrary, the sense of mission and the sense of destiny is such a powerful thing. People make this point on.
You saw this year after September 11th, right? People had.
Yeah, it was the same kind of thing, in a secular way. But people after September 11th, people felt. I think it was the Aish. Some of the Aish lecturers make this point. They say, people think of. I think I heard this from Rabbi Becher, but people think of pain as the opposite of pleasure, but that's really a mistake. Pain is the price that we pay for pleasure. The opposite of pleasure is no pleasure. And often people think of as comfort, just let me lie on the beach all day. That's not pleasure. That's just an escape. And a lot of modern culture is about, understandably, human history. A lot of human history was about dodging bullets. Whether it's the bears or whether it's the plagues or whether it's the enemy soldiers or whether it's whatever it is, and people just wanted to, create vaccines so people don't, die from deadly diseases, or create political structures so that nations don't tear each other apart, or technology that helps us do things, and we don't spend all day, cooking food. We just have a microwave and pop in, all kinds of things that we do that eliminate a lot of the problems. But we fall into this trap that our goal, when we eliminate all problems, then we'll be happy. Now that might be nirvana or something. That's not the Jewish approach. What we really want is to be free. Ramchal says this, that when man was created, he was in the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden, right? And what was his job? To work the garden. That does not mean that he had to make a compost heap and pull out the weeds from between tomato plants. That was not what it meant. What it meant was that the garden was a place, as the rabbis say, the angels were roasting meat and preparing wine for him. It meant that all of his physical needs were taken care of. There was no need to do anything other than the things that were the most important. Right? The garden, La'avda, L'Shamra, to work at the garden and tend the garden. La'avda means positive, active work. L'Shamra means avoiding, guarding, protecting against. It's what we call mitzvah haseh, mitzvah lo haseh, things that you do and things that you don't. That all of our spiritual activity is defined as the do's and the don'ts. We call them the 613 mitzvahs. It didn't look the same for him. He was a Jew. He didn't have the same structure, but it was the same idea. He was put in this world to engage in spiritual work, and he was able to do that 24/7 because there was no other kind of work to do, because everything was provided. He was in a resort. The snake came because it had to be a snake, because internally there was nothing in the human being himself, nothing in Adam that would have ever made him want to do anything else ever. So he had no internal drive to do anything but that. The snake came and introduced other ideas, and the mistake that they made, those first people, was to listen to these other ideas, and the consequences, the punishment for that mistake was that now every human being has two voices whispering in their ear, two masters. Chazal call it. That's what Ramchal said. One master demands, you need to eat, you need to work, you need to do this, you need to do that, and we do. And the other master still has that spiritual job for us that we were created for, but now we are a compromise. We can't just do our job. We're forced to deal with all this other stuff. All the things that we complain about, he says, the greatest pain that the soul experiences is this pain that it wants to be connected, reconnect, return to its source, but it can't because all these other things get in the way. So we do complain about, why do the prices have to be so high, and why do the, whatever. Those are real, but the real complaint is not why do the prices have to be so high, or why do the allergies have to be so bad, or why does this person have to be so difficult? What really, all of those things are just challenges and tests for us to see how we react to them. The real question is, why does it have to be so difficult to achieve our spiritual goals? Why can't we just be in a type of framework where doing what's right is natural to us. The answer is that is the way we were created. But this is the consequence of, because we didn't embrace that fully, we got distracted, so the distractions keep getting thrown at us all the time. Now our job is to get past those distractions. And when he says that we have the option, we have to sort of pay out this consequences test. We don't have the option of just escaping from this other force, this other master. But what we do have the choice to do is to recognize what is real and what is not, what is important and what is not important, what is desirable and what is just necessary and not desirable. A wise person, a foolish person will say, "Well, I'm not going to eat. I'll try to live in a way that I'll go live in a cave on a hilltop, and I won't." That's not what the Torah wants. It doesn't work, and it doesn't get us where we need to go. The wise person says, "I need to have a social life, and I need to have take care of my health and pay my bills, and I need to also enjoy myself, from to whatever extent I need to. I need all those things, and I'm not going to pretend that I don't. I wish I didn't, but I do." The wise person will say, "I understand which things are necessary evils and which things are really my goal, and I don't confuse the two. So I have to study Torah, I have to pray, I have to give charity, I have to take vacations, I have to talk on the phone with my friend. I have to do all these things. But I know which things, ideally, I want to do as much as I can, and I know which things I want to do as little as I can. And I don't mix the two up. I don't do any more of one thing than I should. I don't do any less of the other thing than I should. I do exactly the right amount, but I know what my priorities are. I know what I'm striving for. I know what my goal is. And that's the first line of the Mesilas Yesharim, right? The first line of the Path of the Just. The foundation of everything in Judaism is knowing what your purpose is, what your goal is. You need to know, right? Does that mean, is that a recipe? Well, let's solve the question of how many hours should I study Torah, or how much money should I give to charity, or how much food should I eat, or what kind? It won't answer any of those questions directly, but it will answer all of those questions indirectly, because it gives me the organizing principle, right? It gives me the way, by what standard should I? How do I decide? We forget this sometimes, because we go to the world, we meet people, we meet ourselves. We encounter. We say, well, everyone agrees. Okay. There's certain basic things people disagree on. They all fall into one basket. You can read that on the news. We're not going to discuss that here. Let's putting aside those superficial and silly political debates. We all basically agree that honesty is good, kindness is good, and whatever. So we forget that. So we should all come out with the same conclusions, but it isn't true. The fact is that fundamentally, a Jew, a Torah Jew, who has these ideas, we think of them almost as platitudes. Yeah, we're here in this world to do mitzvah, go to Olam Haba. Everybody knows that. That's Ramchal's complaint before the first chapter, in the introduction. He said that's the first mistake. Everybody knows that. No, not everybody knows that. We don't know it the way we think we know it, and not everybody knows it equally. And we fail to recognize how much this affects everything that we do. We think that, the real action, how much should I eat? Well, that's a question of, all kinds of things that come into that decision. How much philanthropy should I? All kinds of considerations get involved. I got to speak to my financial planner and how generous I am as a person, and all those things get involved. But basically, the most important factor that will determine how I process all these questions is, what do I think the purpose of life is? Well, everybody knows that. Well, not everybody knows that. Many people will give you different answers to the purpose of life, and depending on how you answer that question, it will affect every single thing you do from the time you wake up until the time you go to bed. And therefore, the more we can get clarity on that, the more we can get moving in the right direction. And that's everything else, like Hillel said, you can stand on one foot, that's everything, and everything else is commentary to that. So how did we get over here? The first fruit, right? So we were talking about all the Jews are connected. Yeah, well, so the point is that we
There is no past or future.
There's no past or right, exactly. There's no past or future. Ultimately, we're we can, when we forget why we're here and what we're trying to be doing, what we're supposed to be doing, we oh yeah, right, pain and pleasure. So the absence of any discomfort, it can be seen as a goal sometimes. Sometimes I feel like that's what life is about, but that's really just that's not a goal. It's only a goal in Judaism to the extent that it frees me to focus on acquiring pleasure. And real pleasure actually is acquired, or at least to some degree of pain, but real pleasure is an active thing, and it's something that I get, that I pursue, not the superficial pleasure in this world, which is, as soon as you get it, it loses. It's never as good when you get it as before you get it. But the real pleasure is a lasting pleasure. Those are the spiritual pleasures, which are the purpose of life, what we're put here to pursue. Those things, by definition, right, those things are not achieved through comfort. That's what, as in Pirkei Avos, the way of Torah is bread and water and sleep on the floor. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that you have to suffer. It means that you have to be committed to something. Your goal can't be to be comfortable, because if your goal is to be comfortable, then everyone has a primary goal. If your primary goal is to eliminate any bumps on the road and to eliminate any discomfort, well, that's not evil, but you won't get anywhere, because there's enough bumps in the road, and there's never a shortage of bumps in the road. You can spend your whole life eliminating them. People do. People, my whole, I want to achieve financial security. I want to have no health problems. I want to eliminate all stress from my life, and I want to get along with everybody. Right? But that can be fun. You can be harmless, but you can't really accomplish anything. People who accomplish good things, I don't just mean that they do good public things. It can be that they do good things in their own little personal lives. They'll end up stepping on somebody's toes, or getting uncomfortable, or losing some money, or lying up all weekend night worrying. That happens, not because we believe those are goals, but because if your goal is to, unless your goal is to eliminate all this comfort from your life, if your goal is going to be anything other than that, if your goal is to accomplish anything in the world, you won't accomplish it unless you're willing to sacrifice something along the way. You can't get a college degree unless you pass your courses. You got to stay up, studying something. You got to have to either pass up on some parties, or go to all the parties but stay up all night the night before the test cramming, or pay money for a tour. You got to invest somewhere, or else it's not going to work. And the spiritual goal, which is the greatest goal of all, requires some investment. So you can almost look at Tisha B'Av as the price that we pay to be connected. If you want to be connected to the Jewish people, if you want to experience all the joy, if you want to experience the Seder properly and be happy, we got out of Egypt, you got to also be sad. The temple was destroyed. Right? It's like a relationship with the person. If you if you want to go to your friend's wedding, then you also got to pay a shiva call. If you're not you can't be a fair weather friend. Right? It doesn't work. It's not a relationship. You have to be through your friends thick and thin. If you want to be part of the Jewish people, and I don't mean that the Jewish people need you, although they do, we're all needed by our people. But even from a selfish perspective, sometimes I've had that experience where you go to, maybe it's a wedding or something, and you say, I wish I could be. It seems like such a joyful experience. I'm only a casual acquaintance. I wish I were more. If I were, that person, such a good friend, and they're so joyful because they've been through so much together. I wasn't. I'm not nothing wrong with that, but you almost feel jealous that I'm sure they invested a lot. Maybe there were some very difficult times they went through together, but because of that, they can now celebrate together. And then there'll be other times that there'll be, but that's what it is. When you have a close relationship, you have the whole package. So that's what we do. We say, the price of love is always pain. Pain is always that exists in any relationship, because, so to speak, Hashem as well. We say Hashem. On the highest level, the mourning is for the pain of Hashem, so to speak. That Hashem, it should, in theory, bother us more than anything, that we're sort of dragging Hashem into it, so to speak. And he kind of casts his lot in with us, and it isn't always pretty. We don't always give him nachas. And yet Hashem says, I'm not going to drop you fellows, because Hashem wants that relationship with us. He committed to it, and he sticks with us when we make him joyful and when we don't. We have to feel the same way. We say, Tishah B'Av is our chance. Again, it's the if you're going to have a relationship with someone, you care about that person, then you got to be there for them when it's not joyful, because that's when you're committed. But that's where the joy comes from. A person who's in a loving relationship, whether it's a relative or a friend, they know even when they're in difficult times, they know that it's worth it. And people don't say, people do sometimes, but usually they don't say, well, I'm done with this, and this is what I have to go through, and maybe we'll just end the relationship now and move on. You don't do that because you feel like it's too valuable. And so when there's a difficult time, you're not happy about it, but on some level, whether consciously or subconsciously, I wouldn't give this up, because if this is what it takes, I'm willing to pay that price, because the value that I get from this, this is precious enough to me that I think it's worth any price to keep this connection. We all know the people who walk away when things are tough. That ultimately, that's tragedy, and usually they're the ones who suffer from it most internally, because we. Anyways,
Makes you think of Moshe.
Yeah, Moshe Rabbeinu. It's the Jewish people didn't always give him nachas, but at the end of the day, there was nothing he wanted to do more. So Rabbi Feldman from Atlanta, he has a book about anecdotes, all kinds of chapters about the joys and the tribulations of the Rabbin. And at one point, it's a series of anecdotes. He kind of goes back and forth, and he says, and if you ask me, looking back, would I choose this career again? He says, I would think about it, and with a sigh, and I would say yes. But, that kind of, not without, but. And that's ultimately, the way Judaism looks at the world, we don't claim it's a bed of roses, but we claim at the end of the day it's worth it. That's the way we say Hashem looks at it. Hashem, we say it on Yom Kippur, I think, right? It says they took a vote and they decided it would be better for people not to be created. Thanks. That's a good message. So they say, Salanta says it, that what that means is that if you left it up to us, if you sat down and said, as a business model, does this make sense? It doesn't. No human being would look at human history and say this makes sense. But God thinks it is worth it. So,
Didn't Shlomo say that in Kohelet, it's better not to be born?
He does say, he has a lot of things in Kohelet. It's hard to sort it all out. No, I'm serious. He does say things like that. The Gemara says that many of the statements seem contradictory, and you have to know, it's very hard to take one sentence, any one sentence, and explain it. But overall, the message of the book is a lot about that. It's about the sort of absurdity of life,